We all have been hyped about the new The Last of Us series on HBO, but not much when we got to know that the show's storyline might not align with the source material. Now the question is, can The Last of Us change how Hollywood does video games? In today's video, we're going to talk about that and how the show's story will help avoid the adaptation curse. So let's dive in. First off, the show is huge for HBO. The Last of Us, a video game series about zombies in a post-apocalyptic world, is getting an ambitious TV show on HBO. However, the game has been the subject of many hateful conspiracy theories, and honestly, it feels like the show will be no different. When it came out in 2013, The Last of Us got a lot of praise and became one of the best-selling PlayStation 3 games of all time very quickly. It was well-deserved because the game did a great job of combining emotional cutscenes, environmental storytelling, and intense, violent gameplay. It pushes the limits of how games can tell stories. The show is about to air in the middle of January 2023, and it's one of Warner Bros. Discovery's most expensive projects to date. It was filmed in Calgary, Canada, and has a budget of more than $100 million, which is more than each of the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, following by the hate that it's receiving. While the show is busy getting hits, the internet trolls have spent the last few months complaining about the casting and other creative choices, calling the franchise woke. The series takes place in the years after a terrible fungal pandemic that destroyed most of human civilization. The pathogen turns people into infected, which are violent, fungus-covered monsters. Infected are a type of zombie, but not the kind that comes back from the dead. Think of The Road by Cormac McCarthy mixed with The Night of Living Dead, but with more children of men than World War Z in it. Joel Miller, played by Pedro Pascal, a traumatized smuggler, is forced to follow Ellie Williams, portrayed by Bella Ramsey, a teenage girl who's immune to the fungal parasite, across a broken-down United States. They quickly run into people who are even worse than zombies. They're raiders who eat people and outlaws who kill people. Together, they must do everything they can to stay alive in a harsh, unforgiving wasteland where blood and fungi flow freely. Let's talk about what about violence? Will turning The Last of Us into a movie avoid some of the problems that we have plagued over movies based on video games? With a few exceptions, most video games don't seem to work as well in other mediums. Using repetitive button presses to control a character, attack enemies, or jump over obstacles is fun, but it's not easy to turn that experience into a passive, actively like watching a movie or TV show that relies on story, not participation. The Last of Us is likely to avoid this so-called curse because the game's creator, Neil Druckmann, has worked hard to keep the story's most important parts the same. And co-creator Craig Mazin, who was the showrunner for HBO's Chernobyl, brings his TV storytelling skills. In a recent interview with The New Yorker, he talked about why adaptations of video games tend to go wrong. He mentioned how they try to do the same thing, but it's just the wrong way to do it. Fans of the game are already annoyed that they think that the show will be different from the book. Some people are annoyed that the show's said to be less violent than the video game, which has survival horror settings like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. It's funny because the people who made The Last of Us once had to defend the game against critics who didn't like how violent it was. But Druckmann has made it clear that the cruel behavior was never done for no reason. Some people now say that keeping the violence to the bare minimum is an insult to the fans. Next, the cast also got hatred. At the same time, people have said mean things about Ramsey because she doesn't look like Ellie in the video game. The way Ellie looks in the video game has been a source of trouble for a long time. But before the game came out, Ellie's digital image was changed because she looked too much like the actor Elliot Page, who didn't like being ripped off. When The Last of Us was remade for PlayStation 5, Ellie's face and the faces of many other characters were changed slightly. Not to mention, there's a culture war. Some gamers' nasty groupthink goes on, but many of their bad ideas aren't outliers either. The Last of Us 2020 sequel, which one confused fan called Conspiracy Theory the video game, has gotten the most hate and controversy of any Last of Us game. Yikes. Before The Last of Us Part 2 came out into the summer of 2020, major plot points were leaked online, which, as you can guess, is not something anyone was anticipating. This led to rumors that The Last of Us developer Naughty Dog was paying for reviews and that a disgruntled employee leaked the information because they didn't like the game. They said that one of the main characters, Abby, was transgender or unrealistically muscular, or that feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian, who was famously harassed at the infamous Gamergate campaign, was somehow involved in making the game. All of this led to a lot of violent, homophobic, and anti-Semitic hate mail being sent to the game's creators and actors. Part 2 got bad reviews from people who had never played the game, even though it was widely praised by critics who had played it. Followed by, the show might be a storytelling evolution. Apparently, The Last of Us online multiplayer game is set to come out next year, and we got to know that Part 3 is supposedly being made at Naughty Dog. Druckmann has said that whatever he works on next will be set up more like a TV show. The depth of The Last of Us is unmatched by anything else we've gone through. Part 1 and Part 2 are our favorite games of all time because they changed our ideas about what video games and even stories in general could be. Naturally, everyone's interested in how the show might change our story to honor the fans in a way that also works for TV. The TV show and the game for The Last of Us won't be exact copies of each other, and they shouldn't be. No one, or at least we never understand the idea that adaptations have to be exact copies of the originals. But then again, the fact that people are so interested in the shape of a made-up teenage girl's face is just unnecessary drama. Some hateful ways of thinking are not worth asking about, but it makes us wonder and hope that HBO can keep them away from their new series. We'll see that on the 15th of January. Next up, the show's story prevents adaptation problems. Bella Ramsey says that The Last of Us games are immersive experiences that let players spend so much time with these characters. This perfectly describes why The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 work so well. The plots of both The Last of Us games are very cinematic, from the way they look to how they're told. This includes both of the cutscenes and the gameplay. Plus, the story of Ellie and Joel is already very cinematic, which could make it easier for HBO's The Last of Us series to break the trend of video game adaptations that don't do well on TV. Also, it's great that the star of HBO's The Last of Us show understands what makes the game so special. The story in video games are usually longer and more involved than those in movies. The Last of Us changed that idea by making a game where the story and the gameplay are inextricably linked. Ramsey says that the people who work on the show fully understand what people are worried about, which shows that they care about the source material. It's not easy to make a movie out of a popular game like The Last of Us, but the HBO movie looks very promising now that they know what makes the game so good. Finally, why the show needs to avoid being like games. Even though HBO's The Last of Us says it'll be respectful of the games, it shouldn't try to be a direct copy of its video game version. That's because playing The Last of Us is more than just watching cutscenes. It's also about playing the game, which is something a TV show can't do. Let's say the clickers of The Last of Us are scary, not just because they look scary, but also because they're hard to control in the game. Because of this, HBO's The Last of Us should be its own separate experience. By not remaking every scene from The Last of Us games, there's also no need to compare them. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are playing their own versions of Joel and Ellie. They're not necessarily trying to copy what Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson did so well in The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2. So HBO's The Last of Us should give Joel and Ellie some unique, interesting moments that let Pascal and Ramsey see different sides of them. Still, the show shouldn't be afraid to use scenes from The Last of Us that are well known and important to the game and their stories. And on that note, that's a wrap for this video. Do you think that The Last of Us is going to be different while giving the same essence of the video game? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.